Okay, I am unmuted. So this morning we have a continuation of talking about bias, how different people think, how we are wired. As Matthew, our main presenter today, he has built a consulting and coaching practice based on the belief that if you have a brain, you have bias. That's just how it is. Matthew excels at meeting people where they are on the life's journey of self-reflective discovery and moves organizations from bias to belonging. I highly recommend you spend some time with Matthew to learn how bias is impacting your bottom line. And please welcome Matthew Cahill.
Thank you, Shelley. I am going to, I like to call this hijacking your screen, because what Zoom does is it just takes control, right? And it automatically pushes everything off your screen, forces you to focus right here on this main window. And I always like to remind people that they have the ability to control their screen real estate. So even though most of your screen is taken up by my presentation, and it is a cool presentation, it's a nice, graphic, I like it, I still want to empower you to control your screen real estate. So first thing you can do is double click on the Zoom window, and that will minimize it so it's not taking up your whole screen. And then find that intersection of where my screen is bumping against my square. And then you can mouse over that and drag it over so you can resize what you're looking at. And if you already know how to do that, kudos. I'm still learning that some people don't know that yet, but it really does make a difference as far as your own cognitive ability to be able to effectively pay attention. I'm so glad that this meeting agenda lined up the way it did, because everything that we've done thus far, just about everything, actually everything, is priming you to get more out of this presentation. So everything from the identity conversation, the life hack, the way our brains are processing information, the reference to Kahneman and Amos Tversky and thinking fast and slow, we're going to unpack all of those ideas and then some. So I'm very, very excited. Now, if you are one that doesn't take the time to read email, I'm going to give you this opportunity to go to percipiocompany.com. You can take an assessment. It only takes like 4 to 6 minutes, and you can do it while I talk for this next piece, because the next piece is a little more introductory stuff about me. You could also just shine your mobile, you could put your mobile device on that barcode and it will take you directly to Percipio Company. Click the Take Assessment button and then take this assessment. Okay, it's like 20 questions. It's harmless. It doesn't hurt. And at the end, you'll get a survey results page that'll give you some insights into how your brain is operating right now in real time in the moment. There's a question. Wendy says, how exactly does the resizing screen image increase our attention by making your face larger? What you're doing is just controlling your real estate, right? So you're getting it to where you want it to be. What often happens is when Zoom just takes control, people check out, right? So that's your excuse to go check your email or go grab a book or go get more coffee or whatever you might do. And it's a pattern of behavior. So by you configuring your screen the way you want it, you are actively engaging with the content, right? So that's what the thinking is behind that. Thank you, Wendy, for throwing that in there. And anybody, as we're going through this, if you have a burning thought, like something pops, the light bulb goes on, put it in the chat, right? Just put it in the chat, because I'll be able to then weave it into the conversation. And that way we keep everybody kind of moving along at the same pace. And if it's something that will just derail me and take me off, don't worry, I can handle those. I'll just, punt those until the end of the session, and then we can kind of pick those up and field those in a parking lot manner. So while you're taking that assessment, let me just give you a little more background about me, because this work that I do is not just professional, it's also deeply personal. You're looking at a picture of me with my family. As you can tell, my wife is as Black as I am white. However, she doesn't identify as Black. She identifies as Latina. Her first language is Spanish. She's much more comfortable eating South American foods, listening to South American music. There's actually a distinctly type of music and dance called Saya, S-Y-A, and it's Afro-Bolivian music and dance. It's phenomenal music. My children are ABCs. So going back to this identity question, if there's anybody Chinese in this room, ABC means something different. That acronym is often used for American-born Chinese, but my children identify as Afro-Bolivian Caucasians. They're ABCs. So we have an amazing family. You can imagine the kind of conversations that we have around the dinner table about the nuances that are related to culture, race, age, gender. Like there's some mind-blowing conversations that have happened around the dinner table of the Cahill clan. So now something very near and dear to all of your hearts, I'm sure, if you have been a Bacon member for any length of time, what I'd like for you to do is just write in the chat something that you have a preference for bacon over fill in the blank. Maybe it's bacon over sausage or some other salty type of meat, or eggs, or just about anything. But go ahead and put that in the chat. What is something bacon over death? That's awesome, John. That's great. Donovan says over turkey bacon, right? Or over like fake bacon, you know, the vegan bacon or something like that. Bacon over salami, bacon over ham, bacon over everything. That's beautiful. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Daniel is bacon over ham. So then we got a couple votes for that one. That's beautiful. Good, 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 good. That is awesome. What we're doing now is a great segue into this definition of bias. Now, I'd like for you to take a moment while your fingers are still on your keyboard and your cursor is still in the chat. Give me your working definition for what is bias. Like, what is it? What is your definition of bias? And let's see where we're at with that. Harry, you look very contemplative. There you go. Let me see. Come on. Let's see what you got. Give me automatic response. That's it, Marilyn. Thank you. Good, good, good. Christine is saying unconscious prejudice. Nice, nice, nice. A belief that's not based in facts, subconscious drivers of decisions, a belief that will influence my decisions and perception, judgment. Now we're getting into some judgments, some morals, some values, preconceived ideas, perceived others, assumptions. Yes, 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 yes. This is great. This is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, let me just sort of stretch that definition as well and put it into a context of what I like to collectively call social biases, because bias is also a term that's used with some precursors. So it's not uncommon to hear about bias related to gender, right? Gender bias. It's not uncommon to hear bias related to race or racial bias. If we stretch this even farther, there's a lot of biases around different cultures, right? And I think that's where Volcker led us off with, like, what are these biases that we have about being this way versus somebody that looks differently than us, right? And this is where we get into more and more of the nuances related to bias. There's also a definitive amount of bias related to age, not just in the United States of America, but different cultures handle age differently. It's perceived differently, but especially here in the United States, we have some very peculiar ways that we handle age and the aging process. And in Silicon Valley, and in this area that we live inside of this bubble of the United States, inside of this planet, there's a definitive ceiling that you hit, especially in the tech sector, where there's a very strong institutionalized bias against people actually doing what humans do, right? Which is age. Like, it's a natural biological function. If you're not aging, you're dead. So it's really peculiar when you stop to think about it. But these unconscious drivers shape our reality. So what I want to dig into is not necessarily the conscious biases. I think those are oftentimes they're self-evident. Oftentimes they're obvious. Where I want to focus our attention today is on this area of unconscious bias. And in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been tremendous advances in what we now know about how our unconscious mental processes are shaping our reality. Now, this image that I show you on the screen right now is very busy. There's a lot going on, and our brains are actively processing about 11 million bits of information outside of our conscious awareness. 11 million bits of information are being processed in the human brain every moment of every given day. And our conscious mind is capable of actually processing only 50 bits. And so this little 50-bit area is where we spend most of our waking hours, right? But what we don't stop to think about is how this 11 million bit area is actually shaping that 50-bit area, right? We tend to think like the 50-bit area is all that there is. But when you stop to think about what's going on in our unconscious mind all the time, right? It's controlling all of our bodily functions, your heartbeat, the blood pulling through your body, your temperature of your body. It's all of those things that we do by that without thinking about it, our default programming, right? Like what are the things that are on automatic when you're brushing your teeth this morning? Your conscious brain wasn't necessarily actively engaged to say, right hand, go get toothbrush, left hand, go get toothpaste. Or if you're left-handed, maybe vice versa. We weren't conscious, we weren't using that part of our brain. It was just, you're probably thinking about maybe what you were going to do at the bacon meeting today, or, where you have to go later, or your mind, your 50-bit area is focused somewhere else. So there's a lot going on with that 11 million bit. Referenced earlier, this is a seminal book. If you have not read this book, please do check it out. It's a very, very, very insightful book, because Kahneman and another gentleman by the name of Amos Tversky really broke down our thinking around how we make decisions. And this is a vast oversimplification of the human brain, but it's useful in just attributing some characteristics to these two systems that he's defined. System one is that 11 million bit area of unconscious mental processing. System two is the 50-bit area of focus, of intent, study, and where we pay attention, right? What we now know about that area of the unconscious mind is dramatic, is exploding. Through advances in technology and in MRI and brain imaging, through neuroscience, through social psychology, through evolutionary biology, through the sciences, we are now learning more and more and more and more about how that unconscious area of mental processing is truly the dog wagging the tail, right? And our conscious mind is just that smaller bit. And often these unconscious mental processes have already dictated what our conscious mind is going to be focused on, right? This is an area that I find incredibly fascinating, but rather than go into all 180, I'm going to distill this down to 5 that I think are the most prevalent, the most common, that are impacting us as consultants and just us as human beings every day, every moment of every given day. So because this unconscious area of mental processing has developed categories over your lifetime, right? When you see things, you automatically just know what they are. You know how to behave in certain circumstances because we've built up these associative memories. If we didn't have these, there's no way that we could function in the world that we function in today. We need to have our brains designed the way that it is with these shortcuts so we can process the volume of information. But a byproduct of that is bias. If you have a brain, you have bias. Part of this is getting you to destigmatize bias. Bias isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's contextual. It's actually a very useful linguistic construct because you can have conversations where bias may be in a positive context, right? We have a bias for bacon over just about everything else. That's not an uncommon way. It's bias is very provocative, right? So what I want to do is ask you now, what unconscious bias did you score the highest on? And to do this, I don't want to use the chat this time. Okay, I'm going to stretch you a little bit. I'm going to use something called an annotation. In Zoom, this is one of the best ways that you as a presenter can do a real-time check-in with your audience. So come with me on this. I'm going to take you on a little journey of the Zoom toolbar. If you've never done annotation, the bar looks like this. The bar on the screen is what the annotation bar looks like. And to get to it, you need to go up to the top of the Zoom window where it says View Options, and then select View Options, and you'll see a drop-down menu. The drop-down menu, there'll be an Annotate item that you can select. And when you select it, you'll then see the toolbar. So let's just experiment with it right now. Go ahead and, select the toolbar, get it up on the screen, and just start messing things on the screen. Like just do a stamp, do a draw. You can do text. You can write, hello, Matt, how are you? You can do whatever you want to do. Let's just get you kind of familiar with it. Fumble through it the first time. Let's see what we got here. Oh, look at this. This is it. This is it. This is now we're going back into grade school again. Whee! This is fun. This is good, 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 good. This is great. Now, not only is it now releasing some little endorphins in your brain, we're having a good time. This is wonderful. This is great. Now, sometimes I actually have to warn people, right? Because you get attached to what you just did. I'm going to make it all go away. Okay, so just prepare yourself because it is about to just all go away. I'm going to clear the screen because, I can do that. I'm sharing my screen so I can clear all drawings. If you want to take a little snapshot of this, if you want, you can hit save on the toolbar, and that will allow you to take a screenshot of what's being shared on the screen. Now, note for future use, whenever people are presenting, you have access to this in Zoom. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. You do not want to be marking up somebody's screen if they don't know that you're going to be doing it. It's best to be invited to be marking up somebody's screen before you just start doing it. So make sure that you're not throwing somebody off. And I am guilty of doing that. I've done that in the past. But don't make sure that you know the person and that it's going to be a welcomed addition to their presentation. I will clear all the drawings now because I want to use it now a little more strategically. I want to use this in a different context. And what I'm going to do now is ask you to use the stamp tool, okay? So use the stamp tool, and on the stamp, there are hearts, question marks, stars, arrows. And I want you to communicate to me which of the 5 biases did you score the highest on? So you can use the stamp tool and you can put a heart, you can put a check mark, whatever you want. I want to see from your input onto the screen, which of the 5 biases did you score the highest on? And maybe if you have a question about one of those biases, you could put a question mark on there. That'd be kind of cool. That would be helpful. But it will help me help you to understand each of these in a little deeper way, okay? So as you're marking this up, I'm gonna just go through these in big broad strokes. And know that when you're on that results page of the cognitive bias assessment, there are links to other information, other articles that I've written about each one of these cognitive biases that unpacks them a little bit further. But what I wanna do is just give some broad strokes about what each one of these are and how they relate specifically to you as a consultant, right? Like that part of your identity. Like me bias, right? Like me bias, we're embodying it right now, right? Bacon is a form of like me bias. The Bay Area Consultants Network is an affinity group. We gravitate towards people who do what we do, right? So like me bias is that unconscious driver, right? Of it stems from a threat heuristic, a survival heuristic, where you're automatically, your brain outside of your conscious awareness is always looking to see if there's danger, right? So if somebody, you meet somebody, you're automatically at some level putting them in an in-group or an out-group. And we know that with like me bias, we have some people who are just, like us. They're like us in a shared value, a shared experience. More often than not, it's a shared identity, male, white, female, different characteristics that we tend to just be more familiar with them, right? Not a bad thing. It just is, right? What we'll find is that with each one of these biases, over time, right, the actions and behaviors are the best measure of that bias in a different context. And then it's those behaviors and actions over time that become institutionalized in our laws, in our workplaces, in our workplace processes, policies, protocols, governance. And I'll take you through a bias ecosystem in a few moments. But real quickly, egocentric bias. This is another bias that subject matter experts, right? All of you are experts in your domain. And what we tend to forget, right? This is egocentric bias. Lawyers, doctors, attorneys are very susceptible to egocentric bias because they forget. They forget two things. Not only that not everybody else swims in the same knowledge pool that they do on a daily basis, but yet, even though they may have 40 years of intense specialization in any one area, it still only represents a small percentage of what could possibly be known about that topic, right? So in egocentric bias, we forget, right, that our views are not necessarily clear and true to everybody. You hear it when people start throwing acronyms around as if everybody should just know what they mean. And it's often in the workplace, different languages between HR, sales, your clients, I'm sure run into this all the time. Egocentric bias is a source of a lot of problems in the workplace. Availability bias is the most common of the five. It's what we use all day long. It's based on what's top of mind, right? It's our brain's tendency to be lazy, as we alluded to earlier, and just go to the most easiest access ideas, easy to access ideas. Confirmation bias is a great example of availability. You have a preconceived idea and you're just going in and filling in with the most readily available information that supports your preconceived idea. Often leads to problems. Anchoring bias. This one is really fascinating. It's very common in sales, very common in the retail industry. It's our brain's fixation on the first, right? The power of a first impression, that first data point, that first graph, that first image, right? And it's where our brains get hooked on that. In sales, it's not uncommon to put a number out there so that the rest of the conversation gets anchored on it. There's lots of studies that show this phenomenon on how that one single point can then just determine the rest of the conversation. And finally, proximity bias. Proximity bias is our natural tendency to overvalue that which is closest to us by time and space. Very curious phenomenon happened in the Zoom world, right? Because this is eradicating space. Right? We are all in a virtual space together where we can see each other's faces. Our brains have what it needs to communicate, to see one another, to connect with one another, right? But we're not actually in the same physical space. It's a very different phenomenon that's happening, but proximity bias is also that driver, that longing that people have to actually get into the same physical space with one another. So that's a quick overview of all of the five of the most common cognitive biases. I'm going to clear the screen and I want to segue into setting you up for a breakout room conversation. So when you think of your scores, let me just first of all reassure you that the scores do not in any way indicate that you are a bad person, right? If you didn't get 100, you're not an underachiever. Right. And if you did score over 50, it doesn't mean that you're flawed in some way. It means that your brain is working the way it's supposed to, and that you're actually perfectly human. Because when you start to self-reflect, when you start to see how your mental biases, your unconscious biases have played themselves out in your world, it opens up possibilities for conversations. So when we look at our brains, our thoughts, how they're inherently, implicitly biased in these different ways, we can see then how that manifests itself through our actions and behaviors. And this is the realm of gender bias, racial bias, cultural bias, age bias. All of those types of biases, these social biases, are best measured in behaviors, not necessarily thoughts. And that's a key distinction, right? Because we all think crazy things. We all have these biased thoughts, and to be judged against those is really it's a harsh reality. Behaviors are a different animal, right? We can always control how we behave with one another. And it's these behaviors over time, this is how bias becomes institutionalized in our workplaces through our processes, protocols, who gets promoted, the systems, the governance, who gets hired, where we look for hires, how we engage people, how we delegate power and authority in an organization. This is what I call the bias ecosystem. And this I found to be a really useful conceptual model for pinpointing the type of bias that you want to disrupt. So what we're going to do here is, if you still have your annotation bar up, you can take a snapshot of this. So if you hit save on the right part of that annotation bar, you can have this. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the screen share so I can paste these prompts into a breakout room. I'm intentionally talking slow so that whoever is the Zoom admin can get the breakout rooms set up.
Yep, I'm ready to go whenever
And
you.
let's see, let me get this pasted into the chat. And while I'm doing this, is there any burning question or something that anybody has that needs to be clarified? What I'd like for you to do is please put the breakout rooms of 3 to 4 and set them for 10 minutes. I think that's what Shelly and I agreed to ahead of time.
Yep.
And when you go in there, so it'll be a smaller group, I'd like for you to start, with a human connection. Just share something that's not obvious about you, just by looking at you. And this, I think, will relate back to that identity conversation that we had earlier today. So Volker, again, thank you for priming this group that way. It was beautiful. And then reflect on this bias ecosystem. It's a lot to take in, but I think the conceptual model, is one that I've gotten a lot of mileage out of. I find it very useful, and see if there's any of these biases that have played out in your world, right? In your work life or if your personal life is a way to start with it, that's fine too. And then how does bias impact your work with your clients? See if you can get to that in 10 minutes. It's a lot to take on. They're small groups, so you'll probably end up with not enough time, but that's okay.
All right, shall I send them off?
Please do.
Okay, here we go.
Breakout, or after a breakout room, is just to collect some of that wisdom for a collective conversation here. So if you have just a burning insight, throw it in the chat so we can all benefit from it. Or if you're willing, please do either raise your hand or your digital hand on the reaction button, so that moves your square up to the top. And we can just have a collective debrief on some of the insights that were shared in your breakout room. Deborah.
Thank you. Thanks for giving the opportunity to voice it. So in my breakout room was Joe and Harry and myself. And Joe had this beautiful description of how at one point he was offering this information to folks in his world. And this one person said, too much, can't do it. You know, he's a geologist. He was given a lot of information, our Joe was. And then later, at another experience, this person came up and said, what you told me gave me the opportunity to then be able to have conversations with my uncle. I mean, how beautiful is that? I think I got that story right, Joe. And my reflection on that was, we never know as individuals, whether we're talking our personal lives or in our business lives, we never know who we're with, either individually or collectively, and what we've said as to who's going to pick up on what we've said, what we have to offer. So the key, I think, is to be able to give our information in such a way that it allows people to recognize the possibility of the connection you can give them for whatever you're offering, so that whatever and whenever might happen in their lives, they recognize and realize that they can come back to you, that you're available for them no matter what you're offering. And just so first impressions do count, and what you offer does count, and then give that information in such a way that they go, I remember and I want to talk more.
Yeah. I love that saying. People remember how you made them feel,
Yep.
not necessarily what you said or
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great, Deborah. Thank you. Shelley.
In my room, I had Erica Smigelski and Daniel Morayo. And one of the topics that kept coming up, like, at least for me, and Erica brought it up, was really how our families, how we were raised, the family that we were raised in, had such an impact, of course, on our behavior, but also on our biases. Just really like reaching out. How did your parents, who were they? What were their beliefs? What were their biases? Did you agree with them? Did you not agree with them? Did you run the other way? I ran the other way. My mom was extremely prejudiced. So I'm like, why are you so prejudiced? I don't understand it. So I kind of embraced the difference. And so I think that's really important in the development of our biases from the get-go, from the day we were born, or even in Erica's case, perhaps before she was born. So thank you.
Yeah. That's a great insights, Shelley. And I'm looking at the chat, and Cynthia put in there, why do some people accept their bias as truth and others stay curious about what underlies their bias? And my immediate response to that is, I think that those people that are accepting their bias as truth, it may be contextual. I mean, there may be other conversations with other people that they are more curious about what underlies their bias. We always are susceptible to the single narrative, right? And that's a stereotype. And the danger of stereotypes, this isn't my line, but it just resonates with a ton of truth. The author is actually Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I love the name, and I love that I can even say it, because I couldn't say it for the longest time. She's an author, speaker, she's amazing, but she is, I credit her with saying that the danger of stereotypes is not that they may be true, but rather that they're always incomplete. And when you think about the one we talked about in our breakout room was vaccines, like that's the most recent, polarizing, instantaneous, it's if you are not taking the vaccine, you must be brainless, right? Like you're just stupid. And if you are taking the vaccine from the other perspective, then you're brainwashed. Like you don't know what the real truth is, or you're not focused on your own set of, freedoms or values or whatever the rationale is beyond that. And so I think it's real important that we take those pauses, because I don't know that we can afford to write off all of those people that are on the other side of that fence. So that's where I land on that. Bruce, what do you got?
Well, I was with Volker and Jean Marie, and we got into the male-female bias, and talking about from an early age with being in sales groups where she was saying she would be the only woman in a group of men, and the very clear bias against being a woman. And I was sharing that one of my very first jobs when I was 21, that one of my closest friend in that workplace was Bobby Klaus, who was a woman, and we became very close, and we were on the same sales team. And I saw how the other men on the sales team were so biased against her. And I was going, well, wait a minute, she's a good friend. She's very intelligent. And I would lean towards her and support her probably because we became friends, but it gave me a foundation early in life to try to listen to other sides, and especially to see the female perspective, which is, there's been, as we all know, a tremendous amount written about how men look at things and how women look at things. But I enjoyed our conversation about how to try to overcome that male-female bias and just look at us as cognizant individuals that can speak intelligently.
Yeah, those types of biases related to gender are so hardwired into our conscious mind, more so than any of us want to give credit for or even think about. But it's not uncommon, for any of us to be subject to those. There's lots of stories about being on an airplane, and if it's a male pilot, the passenger felt more comfortable. And this is a leading woman author about empowering women, and was guilty of having that. Another colleague of mine just shared about reading Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And when she read it, she was immediately just assuming that Robin was a man, right? And was shocked when she got online and saw that Robin was actually a woman. And so it rears its head in really, peculiar ways. But it's really undeniable that we've had a history that's been marked by white male dominance, right? Like it's historically, the evidence is there. And what we're seeing now is a tremendous shift in both consciousness, social norms, the landscape, and companies are really wrestling with how do I navigate through these suddenly tumultuous waters where I'm not sure, what to say or what not to say. And it's really fascinating. Volker.
I mean, one of the things that is occurring to me too is how much sort of my history of racial bias and the Holocaust has sensitized me to injustice, and is also fueling sort of a superpower where I am much more motivated and engaged with traditionally sort of communities that have been disadvantaged, and my willingness to support them. So, I mean, that also is an effect of my bias, my historic social background, that is a big part of my motivation and has added a lot of meaning to my work over the last year or two.
Yeah, I was listening to this. It was a recording of a speaker talking about critical race theory in the United States, and how that's become such a polarizing topic in different local communities and different communities. And there was a person who commented about it, who was of German descent, and said, look, if you're not, if you're learning about history and you feel bad, that's part of learning. Like, that's just, it's not, it doesn't mean to avoid it and you can't understand it, right? That's how we learn. And he was just referencing that in a German education system, the Holocaust is taught about like overtly and honestly and harshly, and it's so that we don't ever make that kind of mistake again. And so I think there is a bit of a racial reckoning that America is having with grappling with its own history. There was a question. John said, "I liked your Matthew's response about Cynthia. Why do people? What was it? Oh, why do people accept their bias as truth and others stay curious? Some people are. It's a personality thing. I think it's also a snapshot. I would say that there are some people who may be curious about what underlies their bias. They just may not be curious about what underlies their bias with you. There's other contexts where people may be, willing to explore things in a different way. But our tendency is to just, if it doesn't fit into our experience with them, then they must not be doing it at all. And I think that's a narrow view to take when you're, it's a judgy view. Christine.
You're on mute still,
Gotcha. Oh,
Christine.
look at this. I get to use my cup finally.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Just had this conversation yesterday that it seems that as people are approaching, as we're approaching our 50s or past that line, that values they move into the forefront. And maybe this is because my self-selected groups and the people I hang out with and living in Northern California, but it feels like, the kids are starting to leave the house and suddenly we look around and we're like, gosh, I want to volunteer more. I want to give more. I want to be a better person. There's something that shifts from, being a career person and working for a company and being like a cog right in the big wheel and saying, gosh, no, I want to go out and on my own and have my own consultant business. I want to have my private practice. I want to really help and make a difference. And money is less important. And I really, really want to be better. And I'm seeing that over and over and over again as we're right crossing that halfway line. Is anybody else experiencing that as well?
We see some heads nodding. Yes, yes, yes. Anyone else have some, there's some great stuff in here. Interesting that Erica, you wanna voice that for those that are not reading the chat?
Sure. I had realized as just sitting here after the breakout room that my bias through that I had through childhood and carried with me into my professional career seemed to complement the bias of the business setting I was in, which was, an old male driven kind of boys club company. Yet it was that same intersection where it was the internal conversations that turned to be more supportive and empowering, that I realized those points were where I was able to heal that bias and really kind of navigate that in a different way.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Craig had just said, is there any tips on helping people see institutional bias and systems established for their benefit? Like fish not realizing they're in water. Oh, Craig. Yeah, I think you're alluding to that, the P word, right? The privilege word. I think in any helpful tips, the best metaphor that I've been exposed to around privilege, around institutionalized biases, was by an author named John Scalzi. And if I can find it before the meeting ends, I'll put it in the chat. But he likened privilege to gamers, right? So he was definitely describing this to a specific audience, which were white men. Like this is who he was talking to when he wrote this on a blog post in 2012, and said privilege is like playing a game on the lowest difficulty setting. So you're still going to have to, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be people that are better than you or worse than you individually, but in the game of life, white men have the lowest difficulty setting in this societal constructs the way that we have them today. And I think there's some trend of late that there's some backlash because white men are not being portrayed very they're being cast in a very different light over the last especially the last 2 years, but that line is somewhat arbitrary. But I think still the evidence is that navigating life as a white man in general terms, right, across the board, across social classes, across regional cultures, it's still the lowest difficulty setting, right? And if you're a white man, try doing and experiencing the troubles that you have as a Black trans person. That's just a higher difficulty setting. So I don't know if that resonates with anybody, but it's a wonderful article. If I find it, I'll put it in the chat. It's a great read. There's a long chat that I don't know that I'm going to take the time. Maynard, I met you in Roberta's group, the NorCal IMC group.
Right.
And you're the love guy. So just
Well,
give us some airtime, Maynard.
I'm the love guy, and actually, that's in my view, I get where I am in my life, spirituality, age, everything else. I've been on so many. This call is incredible, but in so many calls about this issue, and where I am is really about love. I think, in fact, an earlier breakout group that I was in, the theme about love came up. And I really believe all the tactical stuff, all the DEI workshops, it's not really changing things. And so I personally, my own bias is that I think we need to change the consciousness, which is more about underneath all of this, it's love, and so I talk about love. I'm talking about it now. I have a love tour, which is it's not like the Rolling Stones or anything like that. It's just I bring it up, wherever I can. I got invited to Harvard Medical School, and I was talking about it. I've met amazing people. That my own personal bias is that whatever time I have, which is why I say that life is brief and precious, focus on what matters. I'm a naturally loving person, and I radiate love, and I want to be with loving people. And I don't get into all this negativity and whatever. That's not realizing it's all happening like in Ukraine. I totally get it. But my bias is really towards focusing more on the positive and love. And if we need to change the consciousness to be able to get things in my own circle, that's what I'm, working on, so yeah.
Well, I would offer, Maynard, that once we institutionalize love, then the ecosystem just perpetuates that, and it starts to change the next person coming into it, right? And so if we go back to that biased ecosystem conceptual model, that's where I would land with an attempt to institutionalize the practice of love, right? I was just given a little signal that said we need to bring this to a formal close. So I'm going to hijack your screens one more time. And remember, you don't have to accept my hijacking of it or Zoom. You can grab the line between where my square is and where the screen is, and you can slide it over if you want to do that. And then you can still go back to gallery view if you go up to the upper corner, and you can shift that as well. But this model that I'm sharing with you is what I found is a better way to move beyond the binary, to move beyond that single snapshot of a person, and really understand that diversity isn't just that initial characteristic. When you hear diversity, it isn't just about Black or white. It isn't just about male or female, but know that who that person is, their identity has that association to it. So when white men hear diversity, more often than not, they think Black, right? They think of a racial construct. When women hear diversity, white women hear diversity, they usually think of gender first, right? When Black women hear diversity, they think of an intersection between male or female and gender and race. And what I would encourage you is to get beyond that, right? Beyond that binary construct. And our brains are wired to record information in binary constructs. Why? So we can retrieve it quick, right? Remember, we're processing 11 million bits of information, right? Every moment of every day. And so when you stretch and move beyond, you're disrupting the stereotypes, right? The danger of just accepting the single narrative is that over time, that becomes a stereotype. And if it's not disrupted, then it becomes stigmatized. And that's when the bias gets institutionalized. And so every one of these dimensions has a core part of our identity, right? We hang our hat on being consultants, right? Like that's a core part of our identity. And so this is a really useful model just to stretch the conversation and give everybody an entry point into a conversation about identity, right? The last couple things I want to leave you with are every one of these 5 biases. I would encourage you to use the language in the most precise manner you can. And when you're talking about cognitive biases, be very clear that you're talking about cognitive biases, right? And you're not having a conversation about institutional or social bias when you're really just attempting to highlight an unintended consequence of one of these cognitive biases. So you can see each one of them has unintended impacts over time, and yet they also serve a great purpose in allowing us to process information in the way that we do. What you can do for each one of these is find and adopt these mitigation strategies. So with each bias, there's a specific mitigation strategy that you can do so that you're not going to be subject to the error of that cognitive bias over a period of time. And finally, I want to invite all of you are consultants, and all of you, I believe, are working in this digital universe. And I've developed an online, it's a digital activity. It's a virtual activity that it's called the Missing Piece. And on Tuesday, March 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I'm going to be taking a group of consultants through how to use this online tool to conduct one of the most versatile problem-solving activities that you can do with a group of people. So if you're a DISC practitioner or Enneagram, or in my case, I focus conversations around biases. This is an experiential activity, the Missing Piece, that brings out these behaviors in people in the group. And then, you walk them through the learning that comes as a result of doing the Missing Piece activity. So that's the invitation. I'll put that information in the chat as well. Yes, I will share the slides, Karen, absolutely. And I think I can pass it back over to Shelley.
Not to me, actually, but thank you so much. This was an incredibly enlightening, engaging conversation, and I hope everybody enjoyed the facilitation. But I'm going to pass this back to Harry.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. That was fantastic. That was really, we had a lot of great conversations. And can you see my slide? Okay, yeah, this is only 1 million bits, okay? It only takes 1 million bits to do this one, okay? A little break for you. This is our next meeting, which is March 25th. Just a reminder, Roberta Geis will be here to lead a session on personal branding. So we want everybody here to come back 4 weeks from today and join us on Zoom. And hold on, and with that, I invite everybody to hang around after